Let's talk about adrenal fatigue and answer the question, will adrenal fatigue actually cause you to gain weight or not? But you also have to understand why you would get weight gain with adrenal fatigue and how it all works. So the first thing you need to know is that the medical profession does not acknowledge adrenal fatigue as a medical problem. Okay, they don't recognize it. I don't know why not, because there is a condition of hypercortisolism. Okay, that's high cortisol. So the adrenal gland has an outside and an inside. The outside makes cortisol. This is the stress hormone. So there's a condition called Cushing syndrome. Okay, from this book, I'll show you right here, the SIBA Collection of Medical Illustration, Volume 4, Endocrinology by Frank Netter. So as you can see right here, there's a condition called Cushing syndrome. This is high cortisol, hypercortisolism, okay? Too much cortisol. But here's the thing. Do you one day just wake up with this condition? No. It starts at a certain point and it gradually gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Just like you have insulin resistance, pre-diabetic, and then eventually a diabetic. So with cortisol being high, there's always a beginning point, and it could be subclinical, where you start developing symptoms, yet it's not a full-blown problem yet. And that's the way I look at adrenal fatigue, because you can have a series of stress events over the years and start having more and more problems with fatigue to the point where it becomes magnified as a full-blown Cushing syndrome problem. So here are the symptoms with a full-blown Cushing syndrome case, okay? A lot of visceral fat. So you're going to see more belly sagging fat, but not necessarily kind of like a superficial love handles as much or superficial fat all over. It's going to be in the midsection mainly. And I think the reason why is because cortisol is a stress hormone. And if you think about during stress states, your body would want to store fat closest to the organs, the vital organs, the liver, the heart, things like that. Number 2, high blood pressure. Number 3, round face, red cheeks, fatigue, lowered immune system, susceptible to viruses, anxiety, buffalo hump, okay? Fat on your collarbone. Also, you have thin skin because cortisol is a very destructive hormone. It's called catabolic. So it starts to break down proteins, and you're going to see it in your skin. The skin is just very, very thin. Decreased libido. Then we have low potassium, and you also have high sodium. So you're going to retain fluid. And low vitamin D levels, okay? Now there's a lot of other symptoms involved, but these are the main ones. Also insomnia, that's another one as well. Other than that, you're going to be perfectly fine. And a lot of people have a lot of these symptoms, so they may not have a full-blown Cushing syndrome, but they might have something that's not quite as severe, and that's adrenal fatigue. So if we come back to the question, can adrenal fatigue cause weight gain? It really depends on how chronic it is, okay? Now, high cortisol can come from many things. Stress, it could come from a tumor in your pituitary, it could come from a virus, it could come from major loss of a loved one. So it can come from many different things. But if you have chronic stress, that can definitely create adrenal fatigue. So it really depends how long you've had the stress, or if it was a short-term thing, and your diet. There's one thing about having high cortisol causing the fat, but then what about the diet? Are you eating really good to maybe counter some of that effect? Because the more stressy you are, the healthier the diet should be. But in theory, people tend to eat what when they're stressed? They eat carbs, right? So that makes things worse. And then also, what is causing this stress? What is triggering this thing? Can you locate the actual cause of the stress and fix it? And sometimes you can't. So you have to maybe improve it slowly over time, but there's always something you can do to improve this situation. So really the weight gain depends on several factors. So here's another question that I think is really important is why would someone with adrenal fatigue or high cortisol actually gain weight in the first place? Well, the cortisol is a survival hormone and it needs to release quick energy. Okay, so what it does is it releases stored sugar from your liver and your muscles. So it just dumps the sugar. Okay, so that's one thing that it will do. And then this sugar then gets converted into fat later, okay? Especially if you don't need the sugar, because we're not being chased by a tiger anymore. We're sitting in a desk. We're not as mobile. We're stressed. And so all the sugar can easily then be converted to fat around your gut. So cortisol gives you quick energy, releases sugar, but it also does this other thing. It will make new sugar. It's called gluconeogenesis. Now, where does it make sugar from? Your own muscles. So it converts your muscles into sugar, which then turns into fat, okay? And what muscle does it primarily go after? Your thigh muscle and your gluteus maximus. So you start losing your thighs and your butt. So all this turns into sugar, then converts into fat around the midsection. So that's why you would get weight gain in the midsection. But now, how does this actually work? Well, high sugar stimulates insulin, okay? And insulin will do two things. Insulin is a fat-making hormone, but it also prevents the burning of fat. So if here you are in this chronic stress state, okay, we're not even talking about eating sugar, just being in stress, and your body is not going to be able to get you into ketosis because of the high cortisol and the high sugar and the high insulin. So it's going to be really hard for you to get in this state of fat burning if you have high cortisol. And we're not even talking about your diet at all. And they also mentioned that the cortisol receptors, a lot of them are in the midsection right here. So that's where you're going to gain the weight as a kind of a protective mechanism to feed organs during stress states. And because vitamin D is low, your cortisol can be even higher because vitamin D helps to regulate cortisol. It helps to keep cortisol in check. This is why a low vitamin D state can also gain weight, because the cortisol goes up. Also, your potassium is going to be lowered, okay, right here, and you're not going to be able to regulate that insulin resistance. When you take insulin, you make insulin more sensitive, and it can actually help to prevent it from getting out of control. So when you have high cortisol, there's always a low potassium, low vitamin D, high sodium situation. All right, so now that you have all the different pieces to this puzzle, which I think is very important, starting out with increasing your awareness of what's going on, now the question is, what is the stress that's triggering the whole thing? You have to look into your life and find out what stress that is. Even if there is a tumor somewhere, what could trigger the tumor? All right, so now that you're aware of everything, now the question is identifying the trigger. What is causing this high level of cortisol? It's usually going to be something related to stress, and you have to kind of scan your environment, find out where it's coming from, and do what you can to improve it as much as possible. Very important. Okay. Next one is keto, healthy keto. This is going to lower your stress because ketones are a more efficient fuel. They'll increase oxygen, less waste. They're a low stress fuel. Glucose is very stressful and it creates the blood sugar swings and it can really wear you out. Then intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting increases your cells' tolerance to stress. So it actually makes your cells tough. So these two right here are very, very important. Taking vitamin D can actually help lower cortisol. So that's really important. I would take at least 20,000 IUs, okay? With that, take vitamin K2. Vitamin C is needed. A lot of the vitamin C in your body is stored in your adrenal glands, so you need vitamin C to support the adrenal. And this can also come from sauerkraut is a good source of vitamin C, and leafy greens. And then potassium from leafy greens as well as avocados, because potassium can help make insulin work better and help minimize the insulin spike. And also, I almost forgot vitamin B1. Very, very, very important. All right, so coming full circle, will adrenal fatigue cause weight gain? It really depends on your diet, how long the stress has been there, or have you fixed the stress, and use other factors like nutrients and fasting. And check out this video on the adrenal body type. If you haven't seen it before, you definitely need to check it out.